lovely and adorable evil web.
Hello, my babies. Welcome to Titular Characters. As usual, I'm your adorable host, Eva Webb, and in this, issue 73, we're going to talk to Chris Fildes about his awesome new queer comic, Crime and Disorder. So, tell me about your book. I mean, it just looks incredible.
Well, thank you very much. It's called Crime and Disorder, and it's the second book in a series that I've been writing for the last couple of years. The first one I released on Kickstarter last year called Fanny Galactic, Tucked to the Future. This was a story about a drag queen that gets transported into the future after her wind machine explodes on stage. And then it's the adventures that she has in the future. And this is the follow-up to that story. It's kind of like a prequel stroke sequel. It's got some of the characters from the first book, but it's actually kind of more of it's actually quite a standalone sequel. So we go back to the explosion of the wind machine in the beginning of the first book, and we kind of look at it all from the point of view of a different character, different drag queen, and we look at what basically happens next. So in the first book, when Fanny Galactic wakes up 100 years in the future, she discovers the world has been taken over by a kind of quite a crazy drag queen, basically. So the world has changed completely. So this goes back to where it all started from, and we look at how this drag queen took over the world, and why she did it and how she did it, basically. So it's it's like an origin story, basically. So
One thing I loved about this particular book was the look of it. These characters, they look authentic to me.
Great.
What was the inspiration? Why write about drag queens?
Well, actually, why did I write about drag queens? Well, I had the idea about 5 or 6 years ago. I was sat in a drag show in my local town in Dublin, and basically there was a drag queen on the stage, and she had this wind machine, and I noticed that this wind machine looked like it had seen better days, and I was like, oh, God, she's had that wind machine for so long. And because I'd seen the act for so many times, my mind started to wander, and I was like, oh, what would happen if her wind machine exploded? And then my mind was just wandering, and I just thought she'd wake up. It'd be like Buck Rogers. She'd wake up 100 years in the future and have an adventure. So that is exactly how it came to me. And then I just thought nothing of it, and I started kind of scribbling ideas down, and I wrote this. The story just kind of came to me slowly. I knew that she was going to wake up in the future, but I didn't know anything else that was going to happen. I had no idea about the rest of it. I just had this basic idea I just thought it was funny. And then as I started writing it, I started thinking, well, actually, drag queens are really interesting characters to write about, because I didn't want to write about drag queens, like kind of younger drag queens. It was mostly kind of older ones, because most of the ones that I would have gone to see, but this one in particular, she's been around for a long time. And I kind of thought these kind of characters, they've been around on the gay scene for years, probably, 10, 20 years they've been doing this. Some of them have been doing it longer, some of them have been doing it 30, 40 years. And I just thought they've seen it all. They've seen everything that's happened over the last, 20, 30 years. They've seen the gay rights movement from the beginning in Ireland in particular. They've seen it from the beginning through to, basically it wasn't that long ago where, it was only being gay was only legalized in Ireland in, I think it was 1996 or 1997. I'm not sure of the exact date. And then progress just moved so quickly, where we had gay marriage 10 years ago, and attitudes have changed so much, that we had a prime minister that was gay recently as well. So, the drag queens have seen all of this. And I thought, well, that's a kind of really rich kind of vein to kind of tap into, the fact that they're really funny characters. I like the fact that they've got lots of funny things to say, lots of sassy things to say, but there's also all the things that they've seen and all the things that they've come across as well. So we can kind of take a look. We can delve into, topics such as, homophobia. We can kind of start looking at HIV, kind of hate crimes, all the things that have happened over the last 30 years, but through a kind of funny lens. I didn't want to look at these topics in a really, really serious way. In fact, in the first book, it's only really touched upon, but in the second book, we kind of go into it in a lot more detail. But I wanted to do it from a fun way. I wanted to tell a fun story with fun characters, fun, authentic characters as well, but bring this stuff into it. I wanted to kind of get people so they were reading a story, enjoying it, laughing at it, but then which start to cover some issues that maybe they didn't think they would actually see in this book. So that was kind of why I kind of wanted to use drag queens. So
Awesome. So what's your origin story?
my origin story. Well, I was born in the UK. I was born in the UK, and I kind of grew up there. I moved to Dublin in 1996. Actually, I moved over. Coincidentally, it was around about the same time Princess Diana got killed. Actually, I'd come out to my best friend in England the day before that happened, and then that happened. So it's something. And then not long after that, I just decided to move to Ireland. Just fancied a kind of change. It's nothing to do with Princess Diana. It was just that's just my touch point for when I came out. And I moved over to Ireland in 1996, originally with a job. And I just loved it here so much. It was very different to my upbringing in England. I grew up in a kind of, in the suburbs of London, but it wasn't particularly gay friendly. I didn't have a particularly gay friendly background. My family are great now, but back then, there was homophobia kind of mentioned. Same with friends and stuff. So coming to Dublin was just an amazing experience. All of a sudden, I found myself, and I found a group of friends, and I kind of just loved it here, and I ended up staying. But I hadn't really written anything. In all that period, I used to write stuff when I was younger. I always used to write stories, but I only write the ideas. So same with Fanny Galactic. I wrote an idea for it like 6-7 years ago, and I never did anything with it. So it just took me years and years and years to actually sit down and actually write a story from beginning to end. I found the process really painful. I just couldn't sit down and kind of concentrate on writing something. So I've come to writing at a quite older than a lot of people would, I guess. It's something I always wanted to do, and I just never had the confidence to do it. And then I think what happened was I had a big breakup about 3 years ago. I was with my partner in Ireland for 18 years, and we broke up about 3 years ago, and I was just a bit lost. And I found the writing really, really helped. I had this story idea that I'd had for ages, that Fanny Galactic, and I just immersed myself in the world. Basically, I just hid in the world and created this funny world. And I just found it really, really therapeutic. And as I wrote it, I kind of felt better. The more I wrote, the better I felt. I started making nice contacts with interesting people on the comic scene, and I met my artist and, all the other people that I've been working with. And I just discovered something. It just unlocked something inside me, basically. It was something that I'd wanted to do all my life, and just left for so long. And, I'm just so glad I did it, basically. So
That's awesome. So speaking of art and artists, what was the collaboration like on this one?
The collaboration was really good on this. I mean, what I did at the beginning was I was looking for an artist. So I put out a casting call, I guess, on the Connecting Comics and Comic Book Artists website. And I just put the basic premise, not website, sorry, it's a Facebook group. And I just put the premise of the story, and I must have had 30 or 40 different artists come back to me. And I just couldn't believe the response, actually, and I was a bit overwhelmed. So I basically I kind of whittled it down to 4 or 5 that I really, really liked, and paid them to do some character designs. But Ed Bentley, the guy I'm working with, his art just stood out so much. Every single character that I asked him to draw, he nailed it like straight away. Like, everything, every single character that you see in the first book, they pretty much look exactly the same. I don't think they changed. Fanny Galactic originally looked a little bit different, but the second go of her was just perfect. I think actually, if you have a chance to look at the original first book, there's a sketchbook at the back, and it has the original sketches, and they're spot on. He's like, anything I ask him to draw, any character I come up with, he just nails it every single time. I'm really, really, really lucky, because a lot of the other auditions, they were really, really good, but they just didn't quite get the characters to start with. And they probably would have after a few iterations, but Ed just nailed it, basically. And it's been like that all the way through. So, the collaboration is very good. I basically send him a script. With the first book, I'd send him a script for 4 pages each month. He would come away, do some thumbnails, and then, provided the thumbnails are okay, he'd go away and draw more. And, he'd keep coming back to me through the month and show me bits. And then he would just eventually go off and I suddenly start to get coloured pages, and most of the time it goes really, really well. It's like just the stuff he produces is fantastic. He adds a lot to it. He's always adding like nice little touches to it, and things that make me laugh. I love getting the artwork so much because the things he adds to it, and just to see my stuff come alive and through someone else's eyes as well is really good fun.
What kind of writer would you say you are? Are you a planner, or are you just one of those people that gets up and goes?
It gets up and goes, definitely, because I'm not someone that can do it all the time. I have to be in the mood, basically, and I don't know what that mood is. It just kind of happens. I could just be one day, I'll just be, okay, I need to write, and I'll start writing. Sometimes I go through weeks where I just come up with 100 ideas and I write them all down on the notes app on my phone. And other times I just have nothing, nothing at all. I sit down and I just can't write anything at all. So whenever I feel like it, I write. So, but then when I do write, like with the Fanny Galactic book, I did plan it. I did plan exactly what was going to happen in it. Originally I had this idea that I was going to serialize it, and I had these grand plans when I first started coming up with the idea that I was going to launch a new gay comic, and it was going to be like 2000 AD, but it was going to be 2000 AD, but with gay characters and gay stories in it. And I was going to have Fanny Galactic was going to be the lead story, and then I was going to commission 4 or 5 other people to create the stories. And then as I started doing it, of course, I realized that was a bit of a big undertaking, trying to kind of collaborate with five different stories and things. But what I did was the original story was plotted as, 5 or 6 8-page episodes. So I sat down and I really carefully kind of worked out what was going to happen in each episode. So I worked out that each episode was going to have a beginning, middle, and end, and every episode would have a cliffhanger at the end of it. So when you read the first book, it's very much like that each chapter moves quite quickly, and then there's a big cliffhanger, and then it goes into the next one. So I do structure it. I do sit down and structure it quite well. And same with the second book. The second book, I kind of wrote it in the same way. I split it into chapters and then kind of did a beginning, middle, and end for each chapter. I want to kind of break away from that for the next one. I think it might be just a little bit too structured. I kind of want to write something a bit looser next time, where I don't separate it into chapters. I just kind of just write and see where it takes me. But for these ones, I've definitely been been a bit of a planner in terms of how I go about writing it. It's just, as I say, I have to be in the right mood to actually sit down and write.
So, in your experience with writing and in world building, where do characters find their voices?
That's interesting because I don't know. The funny thing is with these characters, they just came to me fairly fully formed in my head. It's really strange. It's like, it's just like as I write them, it's like they were there all along. It's really strange, and it's just hard to tell. I can't explain it, to be honest. They're just there. But I guess I think with the drag characters, I've known a lot of drag queens in my time. Basically, I used to be involved in something that ran in Ireland called Alternative Miss Ireland. It was a big drag pageant that ran once a year. It was a charity fundraiser for HIV charities, and every year it would be put on in a big theatre in Dublin. Initially, it was put on in bars and clubs, and then it got so big. It was bigger than Pride in Dublin, but it got so big that they put it on in a big theatre. And the idea of this was it was like a typical beauty pageant, but anybody could enter. Typical. So you could be, it wasn't just drag queens, but it was 90% drag queens, but you get other acts as well, which actually kind of made it really good fun because it wasn't just drag. And in fact, the drag was really interesting, different drag as well. It was all a bit rough and ready. And I love that. I love drag when it's not polished. I don't like when some of the stuff I don't like on things like RuPaul, for instance, is when everything has to be kind of a certain way. I just like it to be looser and funnier and a bit more kind of edgy. And I think because I was involved in this competition, and only as the web designer, by the way, I wasn't actually doing anything too exciting in it. I was actually archiving it and creating the website. But I got to meet such a load of really amazing people and all these different acts. And I was documenting all the acts. So I saw dozens and dozens and dozens of different drag queens and things. And I think that seeped in a little bit. So when I say I don't know where these people have come from, a bit of it probably comes from that. I think with the villain in it, I know where that has come from. I used to watch a lot of 80s American soap operas in the 80s, like Dallas and Dynasty and things like that. And I think the villain, Sybil Disorder, I think she's very much in the mold of Alexis Carrington, played by Joan Collins, and people like that. She's more of an 80s soap bitch than a drag queen, to be honest. But I like that about her. So
I just think that the whole concept of writing about drag and drag queens is, it seems like it's really obvious, but it's not something you see a lot of, with queer comics.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I haven't seen it done very much. I mean, when I originally came up with the idea for this, as I say, it was 5 or 6 years ago. And then as I started putting this together, I was looking around and I hadn't really seen anything. And as I started to do this, as I said, I wasn't really heavily involved at all in the indie comic scene at all until I started putting this together. But of course, I discovered some other people that have been writing it, and I discovered The Pride by Joe Glass, and I saw there was a drag queen character in that. But I didn't see much more of it at all. And some of the stuff I saw wasn't kind of doing the kind of stuff that I was interested in. As I say, the kind of the edgy drag queens, the ones that, the rough and ready ones. And I just thought it was something that was, something that was really good to look into. As I said, because of the reasons, because these characters have, these drag queens have been around and they've seen it all, and, they've lived through so many different things, the older ones, that I couldn't understand why it hadn't been done. I guess it's, I don't know how easy it is to write them without making them into kind of stereotypes, perhaps. And, I don't know. I don't know why there's not too many, but I certainly think there's going to be more. I certainly think that now things like RuPaul and stuff like that has taken off. I expect to see more people doing it, and which is good. I want to see a kind of variety of it. So it'd be good if like Fanny Galactic is one amongst lots of other different stories, and I think that would be really fantastic.
So do you have a favorite type of story to write?
I would say it's interesting because the first book is really madcap sci-fi and really silly, but with a bit of a heart behind it. But then the second one is a little bit more serious, and but it's still got the humor. I think the second one is more where I want to go with my writing. The fact is that, I want to write stuff that's funny, but with a heart and a serious kind of message behind it. So I think definitely. Sorry, I'm losing my chain of thought.
You're fine.
So I definitely think it will be this kind of story, the story that you see in the second book, where it's a kind of like a thriller stroke horror with comedy undertones. So everything, I'd always want all of these stories to kind of be maybe slightly different genres. So the first one is sci-fi, the second one is kind of like a political thriller, and the third one is this big romp set on the Titanic that I'm really excited to write. I've actually got that one. So I like the idea of it. So that's going to be like a kind of, again, that's a murder mystery one, that one. But so we'll have all these genres. So it's a case of me taking a genre, sticking drag queens in it, and then adding a bit of kind of humor and some kind of message, to do with LGBT rights within it as well. I think it's quite important. So that's the kind of thing I want to write about anyway. That's the kind of style I want.
That's amazing. So do you have a crystallized thought on inclusion and representation in your work?
I think that's an interesting question, because I think just by the nature of what I'm writing, because I'm writing about gay characters and gay storylines and gay issues, I think that, I'm automatically, covering a lot of topics to do with inclusion and diversity, things like that. And I think that's really important. It's something I want to write about. It's something I want to focus on. It's the kind of stuff I didn't see when I was growing up. 2000 AD, which is what I lived on. I've read that.
Good stuff.
I've read it since I was like 6 years old or something, and and Judge Dredd magazine and stuff. And I never saw any representation in that at all until there's a character called Devil in War in it a few years ago, and he's come back recently, actually. But again, that's been pretty much it. Their representation in 2000 AD has not been great at all. But I do think it's getting better. But again, I just think it's really, really important that when people look at comics and they see something about themselves reflected back, that isn't stereotypical as well. I want my stories to be, the characters are drag queens, but I don't want them to be acting like they're a drag queen on stage. They're not on stage. Mm-hmm. They're a drag queen shoved into a situation. So I don't want them like walking around like making quips all the time. There's a little bit of that, but the fact is that I want to make them more rounded. I want to make the characters more interesting, and I want to make them flawed as well. Actually, if you've read the first one, you realize someone actually said to me, who are the nice characters in it? I actually think there are nice characters in it, but a lot of the characters are flawed in it. Fanny Galactic, the main character, she's a really nice character, but she's a little bit kind of ditzy, a little bit selfish. And the villain as well. The villain, even though she's really, really evil, she's got a good reason for being like that. She's, as you'll find out in the second one, she's really, really angry, but she's grown up in Britain in the 80s and the 90s with a, homophobic background, not just her, we don't really talk about her family. She's really angry about the way, the state treated people back then, all the laws and things. And I think it's important to kind of look at some of this stuff as well. It's something you don't see very often, and it's something that I'm covering quite a lot, is we don't see people talking about historical wrongs that were done against our communities, basically. There's a lot of talk about, rights that we have now, and things, there's still a lot of problems and still a lot of obstacles to overcome. But there's a lot of people that kind of dealt with some really difficult stuff in the 80s and the 90s and even before, losing friends to HIV is something that a lot of people have kind of lived through. It was covered really well in It's a Sin by Russell T Davies last year. But there's other stuff as well. There's stuff like, we had this thing called Section 28 in Britain, which was a law that meant that if you could not promote homosexuality, they said. So if you were a teacher in school, you couldn't talk about being gay. You couldn't be gay. So that's one side of it. But it also meant that if you were being bullied at school for being gay, you could not go to your teacher, because your teacher would be fired if they spoke to you about it. So there's all of this kind of stuff, all this stuff that happened back then that people don't really talk about. We've moved on and we've got quite a lot of our rights, loads more that we still need. And society has moved on, but it's almost like some of these things have been forgotten. And I think it's important to shine a light on some of these things because they could happen again. And they are happening again. We see, I think it's in Hungary, they're trying to bring in a law like Section 28. And people are like, oh yeah, a lot of people probably won't realize the damage that kind of stuff like that did. So I just think it's important that, for me, inclusion isn't just about including gay characters. It's about including flawed ones. And it's also about looking at kind of stories that maybe people aren't really talking about at the moment.
The next question seems kind of silly because I feel like this is a really, really distinct book. But how do you make a book distinct and memorable?
How do you do it? I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'd want to write something that wasn't distinct or memorable, if you know what I mean. I think for me, because I come up with lots of ideas, I have loads of different story ideas, but the ones that I would sit down and write, because since I've written Fanny Galactic, I've written several more stories and several more synopses. But the ones that I actually go and sit down and I want to work on are the ones that I think will catch people's attention. I think it's really important. Like with something like Fanny Galactic, it's got this hook. It's a drag queen in the sent into the future, and the new one's got a hook as well. And I'm working on a couple of other things like that too. And I just think I will probably just not work on the ideas that I don't think will have an impact like that.
So, do you have a favorite issue or comic book story of all time?
I did, but my opinion of it has changed. It's really funny. I loved Preacher in the 90s. I really, really, really enjoyed it. And I thought it had some absolutely fantastic moments in it that are really, really memorable. But now I can't read it. I don't like it as much as I did. I find it really, really violent. I find it, I don't know. I just find some of the humor is a bit like, maybe I found it funnier because I was much, much younger or something like that. But at the time it had a really big impact on me. I just thought it was just something that was so fresh. And I still think it has that. I still think it was something that kind of like really punched through. It was, it was just something so different. And kind of, there was a lot of interesting stuff in it. But it certainly had an impact on me during the 90s. But as I say, I find it difficult to go back to it. I'm trying to think of some other stories as well. God, my mind's gone blank. I think there was a really interesting storyline in Preacher that there was one episode that had a big impact on me, and I think it was, I'm trying to remember exactly the storyline, but there was a character in it called Tulip, and she thought that Jessie, the main character, had died, and then she kind of gone into a kind of spiral of like taking loads of drugs and all kinds of things, drinking too much. And there was just one episode where she basically woke up, I guess, and she kind of looked in the mirror and she just went, "Oh, I can't do this anymore." And I just thought that I just walked off basically. And I'm probably not explaining it very well, but it had quite a big impact on me at the time. And I thought it was quite a powerful moment in that story. I know that after I finish talking to you, I'll probably think of like 10.
It's okay. I only needed one, so it all works out.
It was a very good one. That's the thing. So yeah.
Okay, so when was the last time a comic book made you cry?
The Kickstarter campaign for my last book certainly made me cry. I'm trying to get that organised. I know that's deflecting the question while I think of an answer. I can't think of one. I don't know. I don't know if many comics have made me cry, to be honest. I don't think it's something that's happened very often. So
it's okay.
It's interesting. It's interesting because I've read I've been reading something like 2000 AD all my life, and I've read a few other bits and pieces, but I'm just trying to think of anything that's actually made me cry, and I don't know if anything has.
Okay, there was a Judge Dredd story in the 1990s that made me cry. That was amazing.
Was it America?
America, definitely America.
Yeah, I would probably actually, now you've said that, I would probably agree with that. That would be the one, that would certainly be the one that had the most impact on me. I think it's the best story they ever published. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely a masterpiece. I'd definitely say that hit me in the gut. Definitely. So
it's funny how, like, I say there's a Judge Dredd story that made me cry, and like automatically, like before I can even tell you what it is,
Yeah, exactly.
It's really a great story. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah. Yes, I was actually reading. There was a great issue of a magazine. I can't remember the name of the magazine, and they were really delving into America recently. Panel is it? And they did a whole issue about it, and there's some really, really good articles about it, about the making of it and the background of it. It's really good.
So, is there anyone that stands out in your mind as either the most underrated or inspiring creator in comics?
Underrated, I would actually say someone like, I'd say underrated not to me because I'm someone that would read 2000 AD, but someone like John Wagner, who wrote Judge Dredd for so many years and also loads and loads of other things. He would be underrated because a lot of people wouldn't have heard of him, if you know what I mean. So a lot of people outside of the UK, I guess, wouldn't have heard of him. And I think he's probably one of the greatest living comic writers around. And I think it's a shame. It's not a shame. I wouldn't say it's a shame, actually. What I mean is he's got an enormous body of work that's kind of slightly buried in 2000 AD. And I think, I don't know if he had any interest in doing a lot of stuff in America. He did a really good run on Batman in the 90s, but I don't know if many people would know about that, actually. Because
he's done some pretty good work on Star Wars fairly recently.
Has he? Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I haven't read that. So
yeah, he's actually somebody I would love at some point to talk to on this show. Just such an interesting character.
Yeah, exactly. Him and I think it'd be interesting to talk to someone like Pat Mills as well. I mean, he's always got a lot of interesting things to say. So I follow him on Twitter and watched some interviews with him and read his book, and he's got some very strong opinions. And I think it's really interesting when you read some of this stuff. I read a few books and things about comics and the way comics were made in the 70s and the 80s in Britain, and it's really interesting. You get all these different points of view and all these people that are kind of very convinced about the way things happened, but they contradict quite a lot. So it's quite interesting. So if you read interviews with John Wagner and Pat Mills' book, and also the guy that used to run Fleetway, the comics company, there's a lot of contrasting stories. I find that really interesting.
So I got a question. You know how when you read 2000 AD or Judge Dredd it happens actually, I think, in a lot of the Fleetway books, how the storytelling is just really, it does this thing where, you read it and it can be 5 pages or 100 pages, but you lose track of time and you're just
Yeah.
so engrossed in what's going on in a very particular way that I think is unique to the UK.
Mm.
What is that thing? I mean, what is it that that is done in the UK with these books that the Americans don't do?
Well, I think it's because of the format of something like 2000 AD, which is an anthology, and it would have maybe 4 or 5 stories in it each week, and each of those stories would be maybe between 5 and 8 pages. Sometimes with Judge Dredd, they're a little bit longer; they can be up, 12 pages and longer. But basically, you're having to get people every single week and hook them. You basically have to tell a story. You basically have to resolve a cliffhanger, tell a bit of story, and give a new cliffhanger. So every 5 pages, it's basically like you're moving people along in the story. It depends. Like when you read something like a 2000 AD book and it's collected into a trade, it's really, really fast moving, and it just keeps your attention. And I think it's because the way the fact that it's written originally to be all these little different chapters, basically. So each one, every 5 pages, you've got a small beginning, middle, and end, and you just keep reading it. Basically, you just keep reading these stories, and I think that as well. I think British comic writers that's ingrained in them. Because most of the people that are working in the industry would have gone through 2000 AD first. I think it'd be rare British people that would be working in comics that hadn't done that, that had made it big. And I just think it's just like this perfect training ground. And I think in the early days as well, they just let people do what they want to a certain extent. They'd let people come up with do what they want, but there was quite a lot of censorship from the management. So people would have to come up with creative ways of getting around it. So I think it just made the writers really, really clever. But yeah, I definitely think it's this thing about having to write something in 5 pages. I mean, even now, if you want to pitch something for 2000 AD, you have to write a small story. I think it's even only 4 pages, and that's hard. I've actually tried to do it, and I just find it really, really hard to get something into 5 pages. Originally, as I said, Fanny Galactic was going to be, a kind of 2000 AD serialized story, 2000 AD style serialized story. And I tried to make each chapter 5 pages because I was like, okay, that's what they do in 2000 AD. And I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it at all. I just found it impossible. So I think there's an art there. I think there's an art that's very, very hard to do. But I think that once you've got it, I think that's why it gives 2000 AD that unique voice, and I think it really sets up the writers for when they start working on some of the American publishers. It's why they do so well. They've had this fantastic training ground. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Like, if you've read 2000 AD, for example, like if you read and it's gotten better since then, but like that first time in the 90s where they brought Judge Dredd to America, and it doesn't feel like Judge Dredd, it feels like an American comic. And it is jarring,
I read one issue of it, and I couldn't get beyond it. I just didn't like it at all. It's funny, but I just think that even though Dredd is set in America, it's a very British view of it. I just don't think it works. I think at its heart, it's a British written story, isn't it? Or I shouldn't just say British. Actually, there's a lot of really good writers from other places, particularly in Ireland at the moment, working on it. So I shouldn't just say British. But yeah, I read some of that stuff and I couldn't stand it. Actually, I just thought it was dreadful. So
yeah, no, I'm with you.
It didn't work at all. I read there's a new one that's come out. I think it's from IDW, and that was actually much better. It came out last year.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, I read a couple of. I haven't read all of it, but I just thought that was fantastic. I thought that's how to do it. Basically, I thought it was really.
Oh yeah. That was like my initial thought on that one was like, I'm going to read it, and this is going to be more Americans writing Judge Dredd and totally fucking it up, But no, I read it, and it was nice. It felt like the Judge Dredd magazine from the 90s, and just the way it was structured and thought out.
Exactly.
I felt like they did a really good job with it. Yeah,
it just felt so authentic. The other stuff never felt authentic. There was the IDW stuff. I think it was IDW stuff that I started reading, and it was just was just, I don't know, it just seemed like they were just, it seemed like Judge Death was in it all the time, and kind of, I don't know, it just seemed, it seemed like it was like fan written stuff or something, badly written fan fiction or something. I really didn't like it. Sorry, I'm probably offending people that might be listening that wrote it or were involved in it, but I didn't like it. It definitely wasn't.
I think most Americans just don't understand the appeal of Judge Dredd. Just in general.
Yeah, I can understand that. So,
such a great series, though. Anyway, we're heading up against the end of our show. Are you ready for the fun and crazy part?
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Okay, so the fun and crazy part, we have this section of questions, and some of them are written by me, and some of them are written by the fan community, and a couple of them are written by the luminaries of the comic book industry themselves. So here we go.
Okay.
Let's start you with an easy one. What song would you walk down the runway to?
What song would I walk down the runway to? Oh, God. That's hard. I don't know.
It's okay. Is there do you have a Ninja Turtle that you see yourself as?
Oh, I've never read it. I've never read it or watched it.
Oh, man.
I've never been into it. It's the only movie I ever walked out of when I was younger. The original, I went to see it. I went to see it with a friend, the original movie, and I walked out after half an hour. I actually couldn't stand it.
Oh, man.
That was the original, the 90s one. I've never gone back to it. So
I have fond childhood memories of that one. Okay, so if you had a Batman-like security belt, what would you put in it?
Yeah. What would I put in my security belt? Gin.
Perfect. What inspires you?
What inspires me? Interesting people. Interesting, quirky people inspire me. People that are a little bit different from the norm. I like that. People that kind of, just different people. I find that really interesting. I like to talk to people that from like different backgrounds, just interesting people. Like they really inspire me. I just think someone like David Lynch, for instance, would be a huge inspiration of mine, even though you wouldn't see that in my work at the moment because of the stuff that it's all kind of drag stuff. But other stuff that I'd be writing would be really inspired by things like Twin Peaks and his movies.
So pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
I'm sorry, say that again.
So pineapple on pizza.
Oh, yay!
Yes or no?
Yay. Big yay! I love it.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, extra pineapple, definitely.
Very cool. So, do you have what criteria do you have for selecting a sidekick?
Selecting a sidekick. Someone that's going to put up with me, going to put up with my mad ideas. Someone that's going to listen and nod and at least pretend they... I don't know.
That's awesome. Where do you find joy?
Oh, where do I find joy? With my friends. I find joy with friends. I find joy with relaxing with friends and just chatting and laughing. And yeah, it's definitely that. Definitely that.
Okay, so here's the big one. You are a member of the Avengers. You have been fighting Thanos in an apocalyptic battle for the Infinity Gauntlet. He's winning. You're in trouble. And suddenly, he's about to snap his fingers and wipe out half of all the life in the universe when he falls dead of a heart attack, which, by coincidence, puts you in possession of the Infinity Gauntlet. Okay. You now have the ability to bend time or warp reality or do whatever you want at a whim. What's the first thing you do with it?
Gosh, that's a big question. Oh my God, I can't. My mind has gone blank. I can't think of anything. What would I do?
I'm sorry.
I think I would definitely want. It would definitely be involved time travel. I definitely want to go back somewhere. And
Nice.
I'd like to just go back to. I tell you what I would do. I would go back to myself as a child when I was going through a difficult time before I came out. Not even a child, a teenager. I'd go back to then and tell myself everything was going to be all right. Basically, everything would be okay. That would probably be the first thing I would do.
Nice.
It's not a huge, big thing, but my mind's just a bit blank.
No, that's valid. You know, you've got like infinity in the palm of your hands. You know, you can do all the important stuff later.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, you know, even that's important, you know? So, what's next?
What's next? Well, basically, I've got Crime with Disorder is coming out on Kickstarter on the 17th of August, so I'm really excited about that. I'm also writing the next installment of Fanny Galactic, which is called 20,000 Wigs Under the Sea. That is one set on the Titanic. I'm really excited about that. That's going to be really, really good fun, but it's going to take a little bit longer to put together because it's quite a big story. I'm also working on something completely different. I'm working on a horror story set in the Middle Ages. I have a really cool artist that's agreed to draw it for me, and I'm very, very excited about that. That I'm probably going to do in the new year because I've got Thought Bubble coming up, this convention in the UK, so I'm kind of just focusing on the current book at the moment and maybe introducing people to the first book as well. But certainly in the new year, I want to start working on this horror story. I'm really, really excited about it. It's something that came to me a few months ago when I couldn't sleep one night, and the whole thing just came from beginning to end. I basically didn't sleep all night because the story was just pouring into my head. So I finally wrote it down about a month ago. I was actually too scared to write it down, and now I'm excited to maybe start working on that in the new year.
That's amazing. Well, Chris, I wanted to thank you for doing my humble little podcast, just making the time for it. This was just amazing.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you talking to me. As I say, it's the first time I've done one, so apologies if my mind goes blank every so often.
Oh, no. You did great. You seriously did. So, where can people find you online?
Basically, at the moment, Twitter is the best place to find me at the moment. I mean, I don't post a huge amount on it, but I will be ramping up on it a little bit more during the campaign. So my Twitter handle would be I am Chris Fildes, which is IAM Chris FILDES.
And now it's time to close the show. Imagine it. The lights beginning to come on in an empty theater. People starting to get up from their seats. The smell of popcorn crushed on the floor. And the thought runs through your head that Titular Characters is awesome, and you want to support it. Fear not, my friends, there are tons of ways to do it. You can follow Eva at Eva is Adorable on Twitter. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Castbox, or Podcast Addict. And if you're feeling super generous, you can leave some dough at buymeacoffee.com/Eva is Adorable. There, you can contribute as little as $1. And every bit goes towards paying for production and hosting of this show. How cool is that? Titular Characters is a show about the things we love. It is produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. Opening theme by Antonia Marquis. Closing theme by Mikey Flash of Speed Force Music. The dreamy announcer guy who reads the credits is Donnie Underwood. That's me. Join us next time for another death-defying adventure in cyberspace. See you then!